Welcome everyone to the Hartford chapter of the Bionutrient Food Association. Thanks for coming out this evening. I'm going to keep this real brief because you're not here to listen to me. This is Dan Kittredge, the Executive Director, and our speaker tonight.
All right, that was very brief.
Yep.
Getting straight to the point. All right, we've got a couple hours scheduled, so I'll just start with a quick introduction and then take questions, and then move extemporaneously from there. Volume up. All right. So there's two main topics here that are actually part of the same general topic. One is soil and growing food, mostly in cases it's vegetables, perennials perhaps, and the other is human health, degenerative disease, nutrition, and the sort of meta implications of that. There's other corollaries which are carbon sequestration and the environment, the food bill, ag policy, the pharmaceutical industry. Eventually, if you want to get into more follow-on effects like the economic viability of the nation and consciousness. I always like to talk about consciousness, but I usually say that for the end. Quick background about myself. My name is Dan. I grew up on a small sort of homestead-like organic farm in central Massachusetts, a small town called Barry, which is just to the east of the Powell Reservoir. It's about 35 minutes north of Sturbridge, about 84, straight north. My parents run an organization called NOFA, which some of you guys may have heard of, the Massachusetts chapter of NOFA. There's 7 state chapters. My father's the National Farmer, which is a journal of NOFA. So I not only grew up on an organic farm, but I also grew up on sort of the movement, as it were. Currently, I have a 24-acre farm, a homestead. We do grass-fed beef and salad greens and everything in between. My wife and 3 children. I was just saying, sorry. Every now and then I come out and do something like this and speak, but I'll be delivering into Boston as I do twice a week tomorrow morning, leaving at 5. So I'm really actually a farmer. I happen to have a day job. I like to stay at the farm so I can pay the bills, and then I do my nonprofit work on the side. So that's actually the economics of the situation. When I got married about 10 years ago, I had no other viable, job, occupation than farming. I had been managing my parents' farm for my 20s, ever since I was a kid, really. And my experience of being a farmer was that you work a lot and really don't make much money at all. And I'm a bit lazy for that. So I don't really like this prospect of the next 50 years of working a lot and not making much money. I'd like to have a little bit of a better quality of life. I think living on the land, being at home and having your kids around and all that kind of stuff in nature is really quite nice. There's some basic realities to life as well. So I started looking a little more actively. I had a strong self-interest. It's on.
Good.
Yes, no, it's catching me from here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did that right.
We're all good.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Should I wait to the camera?
Yes.
There shouldn't be. Let me check.
You know that, Mark? Yeah. Okay. First off, through. So my basic self-interest was, my economic livelihood, my career, and I started to actively, cogitate and contemplate and, really reflect on my trajectory in life. And I started thinking about organic and being an organic farmer, and I had already sort of been brought up with this idea that organic was just sort of inherently better. I'm not sure if you go to India, right? They just know they're better, right, than us. If you talk to any social class or group or country or anybody, they know they're better. It's sort of a fact of life. And I always knew I was better because I was an organic farmer. But I was starting to think about the fact that, our potatoes were taken out every year by Colorado potato beetles. They were absolutely eaten alive by Colorado potato beetles. And our cucumbers, we would plant successions of cucumbers every 3 weeks or so. We had to plant more cucumbers because they'd only last for about 3 weeks before the start to get all weazened on one end and fat, and the powdery mildew would take them down. And you can go through the crop, right, by type. It doesn't really matter whether it's the winter squash, tomatoes, blights. you can really just sort of brassicas. I mean, we didn't plant broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower in the spring because flea beetles, you know, what can you do about flea beetles? You can't do anything about flea beetles. And I was like, if organic is better, and our plants are being sort of, you know, absolutely taken out by nature, perhaps something's not right here in the situation. Because if you think about animals, I like to use some visceral metaphors, so here you are, forewarned. Visceral metaphors are about to arrive. If anyone here was being eaten alive by a flesh-eating fungus, or your cat, or your dog, or your cow, that would be a sign of severe, you know, problems, right? That's not good, and that's what a powdery mildew is. It's a flesh-eating fungus. If your chickens, you were raising layer hens, and your chickens are being eaten alive by maggots, that would be a serious problem. And yet our potatoes are eaten alive by clouded potato beetles. They're being eaten alive by maggots functionally. That nature is telling us something, even though we don't want to listen to it because we want to think we're better, that we're actually not doing a good job. These are signs of serious issue. So that was sort of one of the real, foundational shakes to my understanding. And so and as I was thinking about this, I was also looking into books and conferences and lectures and courses and trying to more deeply understand. And so, make a long story short, over the past, it's almost 10 years now, I've been actively struggling to understand and more deeply integrate some what I call principles of biological systems. And the science is really quite old and simple and very intuitive about how to create an environment where life flourishes, whether it's your plants or yourselves or your children, your environment, your culture, all these things. It seems to me that can be a very valuable lens through which to look. So that's the sort of broad rubric of the presentation is principles of biological systems. We like to sort of start safe in people's gardens, and then we can talk about human health and other things if you like. I really like to take questions and see what people are curious about. What are the topics you want me to cover? I have a pretty deep set of metaphors and analogies that I think express various attributes. What I do with the BFA, the Bionutrient Food Association, which is the nonprofit that we have established to try to look at these things, is educate growers, farmers, gardeners, homesteaders of all sizes in principles of biological systems. How do you grow healthier plants? If this is true, it should work. And I mean, I think we're not yet 3.5 years old. We have an annual operating budget of about $110,000, depending on which year you're looking at, it's 98 or 120. And we're operating across the country we're giving courses to farmers. We've got chapters established. We're doing some really, I think, pretty cutting edge research into what food quality is. It seems in my personal experiences, it works if you actually, work in more harmony with life. Your crops flourish. You actually get more yield because the plant isn't being, attacked all the time. It's nothing revolutionary. If you're not sick, then you're healthy. If you're healthy, you're more functional, right? Same with your plants as your own body. What we really have been doing most is give these sort of 2-day courses on how do you do this, whether it's a garden or a homestead or a farm, whatever. And we've in the past year, we've established this chapter sort of infrastructure where we're supporting local groups around the country who have been attending these courses or found out about it online to raise awareness in their local areas. So through that process, reaching out more to a broader audience, not just farmers and gardeners, but consumers. Interestingly, most people buy food. Anybody hear about this one? Most people buy food. So it has a significant impact on a lot of people, the quality of the food you eat. So I'm happy to talk more about the human implications if you want. This was like maybe a little bit less of a gardening audience and a little bit more of a broader audience. So
what do you do about the potato beetles?
What do you do about potato beetles?
What did you do about the potato beetles?
That's a really good question.
And then you can go into the flea beetles. Yeah, what do you do with the fleas? I never get those.
Yes.
And powdery mildew.
Powdery mildew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
do you have when you have one of these diseases to actually catch it and correct it? Do you have a window of time you can work with it, or do you consider it?
No, absolutely not. Not game over. Depends, of course, on your level of interest and effort, and functional, how many tools you have in your toolbox. Yes. Response time? What's called response time? We're getting to that time of year where, you know, some of these things are going to be showing up if they're not already. Lake blight, you know, I mean, it's been hitting every year. I planted a lot of tomatoes this year because last year in the Pioneer Valley, in Western Mass, all the organic farm CSAs didn't have any tomatoes in August.
Until August.
In August.
Oh, they didn't have.
They didn't have any tomatoes in August. The organic farm CSAs in, Hadley and Amherst and, straight down the middle of the Pioneer Valley didn't have tomatoes.
And they sold out of tomatoes?
No, they were all dead.
Why was that?
Virus, so-
In August,
Was it
last
another
year.
late blight year, though?
Late blight. It was year 6 or 7 of late blight every year. I mean, for those people who want to grow healthy crops, it's a serious market opportunity. I planted a lot of tomatoes this year. I'm like, last year, oh my God, I could have sold thousands of pounds a week if I had those planted. So anyway, sorry, tangent.
I was reading the book, The Intelligent Gardener.
Yes.
And it talked about I have a sandy soil, so washing the nutrients out
Yes.
of the soil. So we talk a little bit about keeping the soils
Weathered
properly
soils or-
fertilized
yes.
so that they can keep up with.
Yes. Weathered soil / mineralization. Okay.
And someone mentioned adding green sand to your soil really, really is important, and I don't understand enough about it. Can you elaborate on it?
Yes.
The importance of trace minerals, which
Trace
are often
minerals.
overlooked
Yes.
because they're present in small quantities.
And yet limiting factors. We understand the principal limiting factor. Yeah, boron is one big one.
Especially boron.
Anybody who hasn't done added boron to their soil, go get some borax, put it in your garden.
Too much, so.
30 pounds to the acre.
What does it do?
It supplies boron, which is a critical trace element, a critical limiting factor. And we know the principal limiting factor? Quick sort of point here, and I'll keep taking questions. Who here has heard of vitamin B12? You've heard of vitamin B12? In science, they call it cyanocobalamin. Doesn't really matter. Cyanocobalamin basically means it's an atom of cobalt with a few amino acids attached to it. And a lot of vegetarians have been told if you are eating a plant-based diet, you will not get enough B12 in your diet, and you could become anemic. And some people may have heard that and been told to take a B12 supplement. What happens if you really don't have enough B12 is you become dead. We need B12 to function. We are B12 dependent organisms. It's an enzyme that's used for biochemical processes, and I'm happy to talk about biochemistry. It's not that complicated, really, biochemistry. We need B12 to exist. The amount of cobalt that can sit on the head of a pin or something. Right? We don't need a lot, but it's a critical element in this compound, which is critical for our bodies to function. Now, 80% of the species of soil life that exist are B12 dependent. People know about soil life, about bacteria and fungi in the soil and how they're actually feeding the plant. 80% of the species, of the 4.5 million species that exist, are B12 dependent. So if you don't have cobalt in your soil, all the composting in the world is not going to necessarily provide that cobalt because you're just taking the plants that didn't have cobalt and putting it back into the soil. And right? So the principle of the limiting factor says if you don't have a sufficient level of critical things present, system breakdown occurs, which is the root answer to the question of potato beetles, powdery mildew, flea beetles, response time, all that kind of stuff. If you can provide what life needs to function, it can do really amazing things. Life is really very impressive.
And it makes the plant resistant to the beetle?
Just to continue the answer, yes. Okay. I want to draw a picture first. No, I'm not going to continue the answer yet. You can ask some questions. We can start there. It's on top. Anybody else have questions?
Can you foliage spray like minerals, like rock minerals? Can you foliage spray that wash it, take the water, and
How do you make a foliar spray? What is a foliar spray?
right.
In case not everybody knows what you know about it.
Minerals? Right.
Yes, foliar sprays. How to make? Sure.
When you talk about different soils, the soils that are in the Bruce Valley here,
Yeah.
that are,
Yes.
There, most of the plants, so
Yes.
our soils and most of the cake soils, that's something.
Yes, it is absolutely interesting.
Now, you mentioned cobalt now, and you said if you don't have it, all the composting won't, it won't be as effective. Is there a way to incorporate your compost making so that plants are taking up cobalt and you're adding it to your compost?
That's the best way to add minerals.
And
the
what-
best way to add minerals, rocks, minerals, whatever your source is, doesn't really matter.
But do we have cobalt here? Can we plant plants with a taproot that'll take it up and we put it in our compost? Or?
No, not really.
It has to
It will
be
take a
added.
long time. If you're willing to work on geological time frames,
No.
yes, it's totally possible. Nature will figure it out. Nature has already devised strategies for doing that, but it takes a little while.
Okay.
And if you care about what you're reading this year or next year, or your kids are reading, I think it's really important to do this remineralization thing, because it really just, yeah, that's where we're going to start, I think, remineralization.
So can minerals actually like work in the soil if they're like just a huge rock?
It depends on surface area. The more surface area it has, the more available it is. So if you take a 1 pound rock that has a surface area of 1 square foot and you grind that up into powder, you've got a surface area of, I don't know, 10 acres. And so it's much easier for the soil life to digest it. It's really the soil life, it's the bacteria and the fungi that do the job of taking the minerals out of the soil and feeding the plant. And the smaller the particle size, the easier it is for them. Technically, yes, if the cobalt is in the rock. But if you've got a granitic soil, you probably don't have the cobalt present anyways. So you can crush that rock up if you want, but you're still not going to get the cobalt. Depends on your parent rock. Some good questions here before I get started.
Can you also talk a bit about the importance of balance between the different critical elements?
Sure, yes, really important. Balance between elements. All right, yes.
How important is companion planting, having,
Very
two
valuable.
different species that are beneficial to each other? And is that as important as soil or less?
Where in nature do you see monocultures? Where in nature do you see bare soil? Right. As far as I'm concerned, what we're trying to do here is emulate nature to the best of our ability, because she's really figured a lot of this stuff out. And she's got a pretty good operating system if you just let her be. And you don't see monocultures. Polycultures are the answer, are the deeper answer, I think. Not just basil and tomatoes, but as many different plants together as you can. The more the merrier, if they're symbiotic, yes. Yeah, absolutely. If you have a garden, it's really easy to do that too. If you're operating on, acreage with tractors, it's much more difficult, which is why the smaller growers, if they are doing a halfway decent job, are always going to produce superior crops, because they have the ability to work much more systemically with nature than the ones that are operating on acreage with machinery and monocultures. I mean, it can be done, at least much more well than it is being done, but I really think that the smallholders have a serious edge in this process. Small farmers in producing quality. Yeah. Did I write that? Yeah.
So
Any other questions before I get started? This is sufficient. Okay. Where in history did agricultural civilizations rise up? Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley. That's one. Any other major historical cultures, civilizations we think back to? South America. There are some civilizations in South America. I was thinking the sort of Western canon, Europe and Africa and Asia. I think about the Nile and the Egyptians and the pyramids. Nile River Valley, the Egyptians have been growing crops there for, I don't know, 8,000 years, something. The Yellow River Valley in China, the center of the Chinese culture in the Yangtze. The Indus and the Ganges, the center of historic Indian culture, civilization. I think a lot of the ancient cultures, civilizations that we think back on that were agricultural, the post-hunter-gatherer civilizations, were established in river valleys. And there's a reason they were established in river valleys. And that is because if you're going to be doing agriculture and not sort of hunter-gatherer polyculture management like was being done in North America. North America was really when the Americas in 1491 were brilliant, absolute brilliant, biological systems, absolutely brilliant. If anybody was to read, the original historical documents, the Native Americans were a head taller than the white colonists, literally a head taller. They were physically so much superior. They were just larger, broader, stronger, more, agile, athletic, physiologically much more developed. And they were operating functionally. North America and South America were being managed in a polyculture, permaculture manner. That's a much longer conversation. But if you think about agriculture, what happens in agriculture is that you are growing crops in the same spot every year. And the process of growing crops is basically a process by which you put the seeds in, and the plant grows, and it tries to bioaccumulate the best nutrients in its fruit, in its seed, for its babies to have the best chance next year, which is why we eat those things, because they have concentrations of nutrition. And when you take those nutrients off the soil, and you go to the village and you eat them, and then out they come in the rear end, and they don't necessarily go back onto the soil. You're taking out 20,000 pounds of crop per year, or 10,000 or 50,000, depending on what the crop is. Some of it is air, some of it's water, a lot of it's air and water, literally. But some number of thousands of pounds of that crop are actually minerals, or actually nutrients from the soil. And if you do that for 20 years, or 50 years, or 100 years in a row, you shouldn't be surprised if you pulled out a lot of the critical limiting factor elemental constituents of life. That shouldn't be a major logical jump for people. The only place where you can continue to do that, decade after decade, century after century, millennia after millennia, is an area where those minerals are put back onto the soil. And where that happens is in river valleys, because we've got the floods, which take the ground up rock from the glaciers up in the mountains. In the Nile, there's the White Nile and the Blue Nile, I believe. The White Nile comes from Ethiopia, from the mountains in Ethiopia, and the glaciers are grinding up, the mountain, and down it comes. And the Blue Nile is from the Congo. It's like the Congo is like the Amazon, right? It's just massive, amazing, ridiculous rainforest. And so you got all the life and the organic matter coming down the Congo, and all the minerals coming from the mountains, and you mix them up and you dump them on the soil every year, and that's a pretty good fertilizer. You get cultures that can do some pretty interesting things that we can't even do now, right? I mean, how they build, we don't even talk about how they build the pyramids. We know we can't do it, and something is going on there. Anyway, to make a long story short, a lot of our soils are quite denuded. Here in New England, we had glaciation 10,000 years ago, which is a lot better than nothing, because the glaciers do come through and grind up a bunch of rocks and just deposit them across the landscape. If you've been out of Georgia, where they got the nice red clay of Georgia, they haven't had glaciation or volcanism or erosion deposits for millions of years. You go to Central Africa, and they've got they mine what they call bauxite, which is basically just the soil, because they haven't had anything added for millions of years, and it's all leached out, and that's all that's left. It's aluminum, silicon, or iron maybe. So what we have here going on in New England is actually relatively weak soils. We don't have the fertile plains like we have in Iowa and Illinois, and agriculture was practiced here for a while. Our soils were generally worn out, and then everybody took off and headed west. Farmers all left because they couldn't grow crops. I'm not sure how that was here in Connecticut. I know in Massachusetts. I mean, once the sheep can't eat off the land anymore. I mean, you've pretty well worn it out. Cows came before sheep, and crops came before cows. They wore the land out. They cut down those 300-foot tall king trees, and burned them, and had amazing rich soil. 100, 200 years of agriculture, wore the land out, and now now we don't have much agriculture here anymore because it's really hard to make a living because the crops don't grow well because our soil's weak. So that's the general sort of insight that really caught my attention 10 years ago. Was perhaps with all of my history in the organic movement, there's something we haven't been talking about, something we haven't been doing, something we can add to our practices of mulching and composting and cover cropping, which are all really, really good. Right? Those are all really, really good practices, but until you have the whole picture, until the biology is really flourishing, you should not expect your crops to flourish as well. So I like to start with a simple picture. I can just flip this thing over from last week. That's it. It's been 2 hours, and that's as far as I got, which is as far as we need to go. So let me just leave you this picture here. I don't need to write it over again. This is a stick figure plant. I think that's recognizable. I grew a few leaves on the stick figure plant, and I talked about photosynthesis. People have heard about photosynthesis in the chloroplast. Chlorophyll molecule takes water and carbon dioxide and sunlight, and this really, really interesting process converts them into sugar and oxygen. And the oxygen is emitted out through the stomata, that's what we breathe. And the sugar, the vast majority of the sugar, at least 60% in a healthy plant, the caveat being healthy, this is a really major caveat, which we'll probably come back to later. 60% of the sugar is manufactured in the leaf through photosynthesis in a healthy plant, is taken by the plant and injected into the soil. Healthy plants take a majority of the sugar they manufacture and inject it into the soil. And if we want to understand how to grow healthy plants, we have to understand why they do this, because they've been looking at this for a long time and they figured this out as a really good idea. They all do it. And the reason they do it is because in nature, no one is adding fertilizer. Whether it's 10-10-10 or compost or any other broad spectrum of other things you want to add, that's not happening in nature, right? The forests grow without anybody adding anything. They are able to use the environment to grow. And the way they do that is the plant makes sugar, injects it into the soil, attached to an amino acid or two, or some complicated list of amino acids, which makes it food for one organism or another. Consider you're feeding cows or pigs, with different food for cows or pigs. So the plant makes different food for bacillus and for mycorrhizae. Right? The plant wants to feed mycorrhizae, it makes mycorrhizae food. It wants to feed bacillus, it makes bacillus food. And it feeds these different species of soil life because they are much more sophisticated at digesting the soil and taking from it the nutrients the plant wants. So when the plant says, I want copper, it feeds the copper solubilizers. If it says, I want phosphorus, it feeds the phosphorus solubilizers. And they eat it, and they reproduce, and they go out their merry way, and they die, right? How long does a bacterium live for? A couple hours. Plant feeds down food for this bacterium. 2 hours later, food's ready. It sucks up the juice from that dead bacterium and its children and grandchildren. And it gets in that juice the element it needs, not just as an ion, as a calcium ion or a copper ion, but in a really nice organic compound, that protoplasm of the bacteria. It's really quite good food. And that's how plants have evolved to work. And so for me, this understanding is foundational to the question about how you grow healthy plants, and then the corollaries of how you grow healthy people and environment, et cetera, et cetera. So there's basically five aspects that I'll focus on, and I'm giving you a very quick overview of this two-day course here. What are the pieces of the puzzle and how do we do it? I don't have time to go into all the nuances, but these are the main themes. Obviously, you must have water in the environment. Not only do plants need water to drink and animals need water to drink, but bacteria and fungi also need water to drink. And if the life cycle of a bacterium is 2 hours and your soil has been dry for 2 days, what has been the effect on the bacteria in your soil, of that dry soil? Dead. They're dead. I like to say genocide is my term of choice. not to make light of human genocide, but the death of hundreds of quadrillions of organisms is due to your management of the soil in a manner that causes it to dry out. So if you want to have healthy plants, you must have healthy soil life, and you need water. So people water their gardens, there's irrigation systems, mulch and things like that, covering the soil, maintain moisture. Bare soil dries out much more readily. It was really dry this spring. I mean, really, really dry this spring, at least for us. Soils that weren't covered really dried out really badly. Soils that were covered with like a couple inches of mulch of some sort fared much more well through that process, even without irrigation being applied. But it was pretty bad. Carbon, people know about organic matter, heard about organic matter. Generally understand that organic matter is a good thing. Ideally, the carbon that is necessary for the soil life to exist is coming primarily from the growing plant. So the more you've got plants growing, the more months of the year you've got green on your soil, the more months of the year you've got feed coming, real high-quality food coming down into your soil life. When you've got bare soil or maybe just mulch and nothing else, then your soil life is going to be forced to digest the organic matter in the soil. When it runs out of organic matter, it dies. So ideally, this is why cover crops are really valuable, because cover crops will often have to grow much longer in the fall and start much earlier in the spring than our normal crops. So I strongly suggest cover cropping. In short, I would say consider putting your cover crops down maybe in the end of August or beginning of September when your plants are still growing. There's no reason why you can't broadcast some rye seeds or some field peas and some vetch or whatever it is, forage radishes, oats. There's no reason why you can't broadcast them into the ground underneath your tomato plants, underneath your kale plants, underneath your squash plants, when you've got a nice tropical storm coming through at the end of August. And they can get established and start growing. By the time the tomatoes die, maybe in October, your rye is already 1.5 foot tall. There's no reason why you can't, do that shifting of plant species in a symbiotic way, in a gentle way, as opposed to pulling everything out, maybe harrow your soil if you're a farmer, and then planting cover crops, which gives them much less time to grow. Yes?
What about weeds?
I am generally of the opinion that a nice, clean, orderly field is not healthy. It's not optimal. If you come to my place, you'll see plenty of green stuff growing around. I basically, if there's a big weed growing in the pathway where it's not bothering anybody, I don't bother it until it starts to go to seed, but I just pull its head off and drop it in the pathway. If I mulch my pathways and nothing can grow there, that's great. But if I hadn't mulched my pathway and I've got tomatoes here or cucumbers there or something growing in and around, that's not bothering anybody, I don't think. So I generally like to keep things a little bit messy, as it were. Yeah. Generally, nature is putting things grow naturally where nature wants them. And if you're doing something which is disturbing nature, and she's putting weeds in to try to balance it out, why fight her so aggressively? Why not let them grow for 2 months? If they're not going to pass anybody. Okay. Carbon, minerals. We talked about minerals. Very, very important piece of the puzzle as far as I'm concerned. No one asks any questions. I don't think about human health here. I think human health is a really big piece of the puzzle and a major driver for most people. I think being a successful farmer is a driver for a very small subset, but having healthy children or being healthy oneself or one's spouse's health, etc., is a much more important driver. I think if you look at the USDA data on average nutrient levels in crops, since the 1930s when they started measuring it, it went down like this until the 1970s. It's been plateaued at a fairly basic level. Like plants can't grow without less of these things. That's where it's been at since the early to mid 70s, and it's been teetering lower, but it can't really go much lower. The average nutrient levels in crops now are dramatically lower than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. And there's good, serious arguments that there's a nice correlation between degenerative disease and the increase in degenerative disease and minerals. Do you mind if I pull on that topic for a second?
Is there any awareness outside of this room?
Out of this room? I go to rooms all over the country, and there's a lot of awareness in those rooms. People come out of, I don't know where they come from, but whenever I show up, they come and they all kind of know this stuff. It's, I don't know, I think it's a bit on the cutting edge of awareness, but all those things that are on the cutting edge now will be much more mainstream in consciousness 5 years from now. And this is at the speed at which things are proceeding these days, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily take a long time. We have this viral media and all that stuff. I think people getting sick. I mean, from my perspective, women, mothers are central in this whole process. I'd like to ask the question, I was actually a history major in college. How did the Christians convert the Romans? Have you noticed? How were the Romans converted to Christianity? Little factor. Through the wives of the senators. The wives of the senators were converted, and then Rome was converted. As far as I'm concerned, mothers and children, not the fathers don't care also, but I mean, I'm a father, I care a lot about my kids. Part of the major reason why I'm a farmer is because I see no other way to create the best reality for my kids. Like, if I don't grow good food for them, I know it's not available. I know it's not available. It's not. It's really very, very difficult to get high quality food. So, not that fathers don't matter, but yeah, I think, well, let me just go into the science of this for a second. And it's really, really exciting. The Human Genome Project, I'm sure people here heard about the Human Genome Project. It was a process by which the DNA was mapped, and it occurred in the 1990s. It completed around the year 2000. In the process of mapping the human DNA, all of the enzymes that are necessary to replicate a strand of DNA were also mapped. And I need to take a quick tangent here and explain what an enzyme is. I think people may have heard of enzymes, may have heard of this metaphor of a lock and a key that turns a lock or opens a lock. I like to use the metaphor of building things because I think it's more real world for people. I like to talk about vehicle maintenance because I've got a couple of old vehicles. Just got my truck back to the shop today. If your muffler wears out on your vehicle, right, you take it off and put a new one on. If your brake pads wear out, you take them off and put a new one on. That's a mechanical system. And the process by which you take one piece out and put another piece in is with a socket or a screwdriver or an Allen wrench, depending on what the tool is. Maybe a 9/16 or a ½ inch or a Phillips head or whatever. And enzymes functionally are that in biological systems. This is the metaphor I find most sort of common sense. If you're going to be taking sugar and building carbohydrates, which people may know that carbohydrate is built out of sugar, it's a big long sugar molecule. To take all those sugars and stick them together requires a process, and that process is an enzymatic process. The enzymes are the ones that take these two sugars and stick them together. And they have the right geometry. Basically, they can attach to this one and attach to this one and bring it together. So think about that as your 9/16 wrench socket, or your Allen or your Allen wrench, or your flathead screwdriver. Different tools have different shapes. What makes each enzyme have a different shape and a different size is the element at its core. Every element has a certain size, a certain bonding geometry. So copper may be an 1.5 angstrom across and have a tetrahedral bonding geometry. And carbon, I don't know, is 2 angstroms across and has an icosahedral bonding geometry. I don't know the exact details, but every element has basically a certain size and a certain shape, like a buckyball or like a soccer ball or like a pyramid, etc. So when the Human Genome Project was being done and they were mapping all the enzymes necessary to put together one strand of DNA, they were able to then, therefore, identify all the elements necessary at the core of those enzymes. That make sense? You've got copper-based enzymes and zinc-based enzymes and cobalt-based enzymes and chromium and molybdenum and selenium and vanadium and a whole bunch of other ones. There's a total of 56 different elements that are required at the center of the enzymes necessary to replicate one strand of human DNA. How many elements can you name? How many elements are in the fertilizer that most farmers buy? Right? That only leaves 53 other ones that our bodies need. Someone was saying in front here, we are a nation who is starving to death. we're really, really hungry. Our bodies are hungry for food, which is why we're eating all the time, which is why we're so fat, because we're not getting the nutrition we need, and our bodies know it. It's not about calories. It's not about fat and protein and carbohydrates. It's about nutrition. And our bodies aren't getting it, so we're aching for it. We're craving it. So what happens when you don't have all 56 of those elements present at the core of the DNA? At the core, when the DNA is being replicated. As I understand it, our bodies, like when you have a car that has the muffler wear out or the brake pads wear out, it's designed to have that piece taken out and a new one put in. Chevys apparently have their transmission lines go, so I get my transmission lines. Right, every type of vehicle has its weaknesses, etc. And you know, we can say different people from different cultures or different geographic areas have their predilections, but mechanical systems are designed to have a piece taken out, the old piece taken out and a new piece put in. Biological systems are designed to be constantly rebuilt. So my understanding is that our bodies, on a daily basis, as part of our basic maintenance, disassemble 4 billion old cells every day and reassemble 4 billion new cells. Every day, our liver is being rebuilt, our gonads are being rebuilt, our eyeballs are being rebuilt, our blood, everything is being rebuilt. This is a constant maintenance process. And when you're building a new cell, at the center of every cell is the nucleus. And inside of every nucleus is DNA. So 4 billion times a day, you need 56 different elements for basic maintenance. This is not your glandular system, this is not your hormonal system, this is not any of the other endocrine systems that we've got. This is just basic maintenance. And so when you don't have chromium present in the cell, when the DNA is getting replicated, then the chromium-based enzyme is not present, and then the pieces of DNA that get put together by the chromium-based enzyme don't get put together. And that's called the genetic marker. A break in the DNA when pieces aren't put together. And so we can nicely correlate diabetes with chromium deficiency, right? I mean, the science is there. This is not new, this is not revolutionary, this is not woo-woo, this is, look it up. This is actual science. The problem with our science these days is we have sort of compartmentalized the biochemistry over here, and the agronomy over here, and the nutrition over here, and the politics and the food debate over here, and we're not looking at it as a living system, as life, as a biological system. So that's what's so exciting to me, is we're putting all this together. And I think that's something that's sort of rising up around the board as people are starting to put these pieces together. There's a lot of intelligent people that are struggling with this, and we now have access to enough information, with the internet and everything else, so it's really starting to come together quite nicely. So anyway, what's exciting is if you take 4 billion cells a day and replicate them, then on average you get a new body every 6 months. So your bones take 7 years to replicate, your blood takes 2 or 3 weeks to replicate, but on average you get a new body every 6 months. And so if you eat good food, if you eat food that has minerals in it that your body needs, then you can heal yourself, right? People have heard of the Hippocratic Oath, Hippocrates, who is the sort of the father of Western medicine. I believe all medical doctors are, required to swear the Hippocratic Oath when they become doctors. And the short summation of the Hippocratic Oath is: first, do no harm, then let food be thy medicine, and never, ever let me be conned or swindled or bought off into prescribing the poison. That's the Hippocratic Oath. It's only 2,500 years old. Every single doctor swears it now. For me, this is all really quite exciting. And we don't need to be, radical activists to be doing this. All we need to be doing is actually actively selecting which food we eat. Because money talks in today's world, and people buy food, strangely enough, and that they do that with money. So there's a lot of money spent buying food, and if people knew the importance of the quality of food in their purchasing decisions and were to act on it, I suggest we can have some real serious shifts towards solution that could happen from a very decentralized, grassroots, self-interested manner. Right? This is so for me, this is all part and parcel of the strategy of PFA. What we're trying to do is raise awareness about these things, provide the farmers the ability to actually produce the quality so that consumers become aware they have somewhere to go, and then begin to sort of put it out there a little more broadly over. So that's minerals. Air is another foundational piece of the puzzle. Obviously, life uses air to breathe. It's not obvious, but it is true that the vast preponderance of bacteria and the fungi in the soil that are symbiotes to the plant are aerobic, and they require air to breathe. And so if you've got tight, hard, compacted soil, you should not expect there to be much life in the soil. Right? This is why farmers till. Because they treat the soil so poorly, it compacts. And then they have to till it for air to be in it for the plants to grow in the spring. That, a corollary of that tillage is, I like to say again, genocide. Right? What happens when you shred this ecosystem is, like I say, if you haven't committed genocide recently, and you want to do so before lunch, all you need to do is take the tiller out and go for 15 minutes, a little quick spin in the garden or the farm. And I mean, hundreds of quadrillions, quintillions of organisms are now dead because of what you did. But farmers till because plants really don't grow if there's no air. You must have air in the soil. And I like to think of earthworms as some of my major allies in the process of tillage. I think it's 12 earthworms per square yard, or maybe it's 18. Will till your soil 14 times a year. They'll literally, ingest and excrete your soil 18 times a year. 40,000 pounds of earthworm castings per acre, 20 tons free fertilizer if you've got earthworms present. So you need not use a rototiller or any other mechanical implement. If you create a reality where nature is flourishing, you really can get that loose, open soil and a bunch of free fertilizer as well. Anybody who's bought earthworm castings, I hear people buy earthworm castings. So they're quite expensive, I've been told, earthworm castings. How much money would it cost a farmer to buy 40,000 pounds of earthworm castings per acre for fertilizer? Right, that's ridiculous. Except if you create a reality where they flourish, it's a free corollary of the process. For me, mulch is major. I'm keeping my soil covered with organic matter is major, whether it's leaves or straw or hay, I don't really care. Whether it's old cover crop residue, mulch and water is also really important, and minerals. If you don't have the basic minerals present, it's not going to happen. That's what I did in my farm. When I converted my farm from old, worn out cow pasture, really nicely worn out cow pasture, hard, dead, very light colored, you couldn't get a shovel into it kind of soil. Put a bunch of minerals down, tilled it up, made my beds, mulched, watered, and planted. And now I have orgies going on in my garden every night. If I was to go home tonight, take my flashlight out, boom, hundreds of them going at it. They're night crawlers all over the place, and they weren't there. I didn't bring any in. You create a reality where they flourish, and that's it. And finally, biology. Sorry, just one second. In many cases, I think I said there's about 4.5 billion species of bacteria and fungi that exist in the soil that are presumed to exist. Microbiologists, as I understand, have named about 5% of them, which leaves only 95% yet to be named, much less studied. We've really proceeded quite far along with our science. Anyway, in many cases, full families of species have been knocked out based on the historical, conditions in the soil we're growing in. I one time looked at a map of nuclear fallout from atomic weapons testing in North America, and they have a sort of, it starts, unless you're about a test site or whatever, and you see a sort of plume of yellow that sort of covers North America, right? I mean, you everywhere got dosed with a heavy dose of radiation from nuclear testing in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. DDT, Winter Carson, Silent Spring, whether it's acid rain or Roundup or you name your environmental pollutant. In many cases, whole families of life in the soil have been knocked out. And so the final piece of the puzzle that I like to recommend and suggest, which is really simple, is inoculation. Simply, what happens? What comes out of the mother's breast immediately after birth, before milk? Colostrum, right? Colostrum is the term. A baby cow, the calf that's not given colostrum can just about be guaranteed to be dead in a couple of weeks, if not shorter. Right? It'll bawl and bawl and bawl and bawl, and then it'll die. And we have human babies that do that too. Right? They're called colicky babies. that ball and ball and ball and ball, and we don't generally let them ball until death. We do something about it. But what happens when you're born is there's nobody living between your mouth and your rear end. Right? The entire alimentary canal there's nobody in there. And we all know that we need gut flora to digest our food for us. Without gut flora, we don't function. They are foundational, critical, necessary to break down our food for us, to digest our food for us. And so inoculation, establishment of gut flora is a critical thing which must occur at birth for healthy organisms to exist. Ayurveda, which is the sort of the science of health in India, is founded on the health of the gut. As the gut is, so the body will be. Not that it matters what the Indians have to say. I think it does, but for what it's worth. Interestingly, plants are also critically dependent on gut flora to digest their food, as I've laid out. And so making sure that the critical species of, in the inoculant, in the colostrum, are present for that plant is really a quite good way to cause plants to grow much more well. There should be a nice, healthy spectrum of species, not only on the root surface, but also on the leaf surface for a plant. If you really want a plant to flourish, it's got to have healthy, they call it the microbiome. It's a new term. It came out like a couple of years ago. It's called a microbiome. I know you guys have heard of it. Look it up. Really, 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 really interesting. What percentage of the DNA in your body is human? Everybody knows?
10%.
What percent of the DNA in your body is human? 10. 10% of the DNA in your body is human. The rest is viral and bacterial and fungal. Right? We are much more, this idea of a single separate organism, are much more not human than human, for what it's worth, not that it matters. Anyway, okay, so those are my basic talking points. You had a question in the back.
Yeah, I was thinking, we were talking a little bit about tillage,
Yes.
and you were saying farmers, but doesn't that also affect the moisture holding capacity? Drying it out and killing it?
It will, in many cases, dry it out, or can dry it out. It depends. So, how is soil watered in nature? How does nature water herself?
Rain
Say it doesn't rain for a while.
sucks it up from below, or?
I understand it's the tidal force that we have, on the oceans, we talk about the tides happening twice a day. The water goes up, the water goes down. My understanding is that water goes up and water goes down, not just in the ocean, but in soil as well. That through capillary action, water can move up dramatically in the water table and down. It does move dramatically up and down twice a day. And if you've got good structure in your soil, if you don't have a plow pan, if you've got deep-rooted, dead plants, dead roots that are, the pathways are still there, or earthworm holes or whatever, your soil will actually be watered from underneath twice a day. So tillage, it's a whole complicated topic, but it functionally does destroy this whole network in ecosystem. I like to use the metaphor of, I subscribe to National Geographic and have for a long time. I'm not sure if anybody here saw the National Geographic. It was called Under Paris was the cover. Anybody get that one? It was like, 5 or 6 years ago. It was a while ago.
I think so.
Under Paris. And they had this map of like, here's the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame and the Seine or whoever runs through Paris. I'm not sure who it is, but and the various buildings. And then they had it's actually a limestone subsoil, and there's all these old caverns, underground river pathways and caverns, and they were used for, at various points in time, storing wine. The cemeteries were too full, they wanted to build buildings that took all the bodies out and dumped them down in the caverns. There's, there's clubs, under grieving graves in some of these caverns. But there's also the subway line and the electrical lines and the septic lines and water mains and cable lines. And if you think about it, it's a lot like that in the soil. There's all this beautifully interconnected, functional capacity which provides for this massive level of life. And when you shred that, I like to use the metaphor of take New York City, take Broadway or one of the big roads, and take a tiller. If Broadway is 50 feet wide, call it a 50-foot wide tiller, which is maybe going to go down 6 feet, 8 feet, I don't care how deep it goes down, not a lot. If you were to take a tiller down Broadway and to shred that infrastructure, maybe you wouldn't get down as deep as the subways, but you would take out all the water mains and the gas mains and the fiber optic cables and the sewer. What would be the effect on all the little organisms in their little boxes in that ecosystem? Right? It wouldn't be immediate death necessarily. A few people in the street would get killed, but everybody in the boxes wouldn't be able to have access to food or water, heat, all this stuff, and you're going to have massive die-off rapidly. So for me, tillage is a really destructive process, and it's necessary in some circumstances. I'm not going to say thou shalt not till. I'm just saying understand the effect of tillage on the ecosystem and endeavor to minimize it. I don't think I answered your question.
Yeah.
I went on my tillage rant, so here we have it. All right. So we've got a nice blank slate here. I will proceed down this list of questions unless somebody else has something they want to bring up.
How much tilling do you do?
Yeah, exactly. I have a 4-foot wide tractor rototiller that I borrow from my parents, probably 6 or 7 times a year. My parents live a 20-minute drive away, and so, drop off the kids once a week and pick up the tiller or whatever. And I have a functionally raised bed system in my fields. I have about 2 acres of crops, of various crops, and I have what I call raised beds. So this may be 6 inches deep or 8 inches deep or a foot deep, and this is 4 feet wide here. So this is one tractor tire goes here, the other tractor tire goes there, and the tiller comes through like that.
And you raise the bed, you made the raised bed with the tiller?
With the bed former. Actually, there's a bed former is the other thing I borrowed from my parents. No, there's 2 things I borrowed.
Okay.
One is the bed former and one's the tiller.
Do you lay plastic mulch?
No, I use gyp tape. And so I may have cover crops, like just last week I planted a bunch of my fall root crops. I planted all my fall beets, carrots, rutabagas, turnips, parsnips are too late, but all those guys. I put them all in. And I planted them in an area that had been, up until a week before that, 5-6 foot tall rye and clover and vetch and cover crop. And so I came through, one day, one Sunday, and mowed it all down with my rotary mower behind the tractor. And I came by the next week, well actually immediately that week, immediately afterwards, I mowed it and then came through and tilled it, shallow till. And then came by a week later and planted.
Shallow, tilling is shallow.
An inch.
That's how far you're going now?
All you have to do is cut the crown.
But if the dirt underneath it,
If you've got root systems that are going like this, and leaves coming out like this, if you remove the crown from the roots, you can kill the plant.
be able to plant.
And I gave it a week, because I was putting down carrot seeds and stuff like that, which are pretty small.
But then it's down, you don't want to till those 6 inches down.
I generally broadcast my amendments in the
That's why we're
fall.
only doing 2 inches.
And I leave it to the worms and rain and nature to cycle them through.
But that's why you don't want to over-till and deep, because then you bring it down.
You could argue that you're mixing it evenly in the soil profile. And if you're going to be tilling anyways, putting the minerals down first might be a good idea. In many cases, our soils are pretty worn out. And what I teach in the course is how to read a soil test and discern what I like to use primarily rocks you can use, whether it's green sand or rock phosphate or gypsum or limestone. There's all kinds of rocks that have different minerals in them. People may have heard of azomite. There's all these different kinds of, and seawater. Between rocks and seawater, we have everything we need to systemically remineralize the soil. I mean, all those elements that are not present in the soil are present in those naturally occurring elements, materials. And some people ask the question, why have I never heard of seawater? Why have I never heard of rock dust, et cetera, et cetera. My understanding is that about 2/3 of the planet is covered with seawater, and the other third is covered with rock, full of 12 miles deep. And it's really hard for any company to corner the market on either of those basic raw materials. Right? No one who's has a major marketing budget has a good strategic reason to market these materials which are prevalent in such massive quantities, because once people know about their value, they can source them themselves and they don't have to pay for the marketing, right? You know how this works? Certain things that are marketed cost more than the generic brand because the marketing costs money, right? I mean, you have to pay for the marketing when you pay for these things. And so nature actually provides all these things to us, and they're readily available everywhere. It doesn't take much discernment to identify what you need and how to do it. And that's part of, again, what we're trying to do with the BFA, is sort of raise awareness about this. For me, I've spent time in what they used to call third world countries. I think they're called developing world countries now. Specifically India, primarily Central America, through Central America, sometime in Siberia, when it was just after the Soviet Union. And those who haven't traveled outside of America, I'd like to report that life is much more difficult for most people on the planet than it is for us here. And in many cases, their land has been much more worn and weathered through geologic time, historical time, than ours has. Like North America is generally quite robust and vibrant in relation to South Asia or Central Africa or something like that. So, so really, I think a lot of people in the world would love to be living a simple bucolic lifestyle and don't, and leave for the cities because their land is being worn out. And they're literally, I mean, my experience in India was being in the villages and seeing people committing suicide because they weren't getting a crop, and they're in debt up to their noses, and their families are being forced to go to the cities because they could not make a living, they couldn't live on the land anymore. And my understanding is, if we apply these principles on a global scale, we could readily revitalize the planet, right? Readily revitalize the planet. I like to say, take the military, U.S. military budget from Afghanistan, maybe not now, 2 years ago, and a month. Like, give me, February is going to go to India, and March is going to go to Cameroon, and April is going to go to Mexico, and you can, I mean, country by country, the amount of money necessary to do this, to systemically revitalize, remineralize soil, would be really, really simple, inexpensive. So I digress. I'm not sure what setting up on that tangent. Anyway, like that. So other questions before I proceed down here? Or let me just...
I have a logistical one.
Yes.
You pitch your minerals, you broadcast them?
I broadcast them.
Do you do it right on top of your mulch?
Before I started.
Or do you do it right on top of the mulch at the end of the season, you're in the fall?
Right, so I generally suggest that you take a soil test in the fall. I generally suggest that that's the time of the year when your crops are, dying or dead because of, their weakness. They succumb to infestation or disease many times, or if you've been a good farmer or gardener, they made it through till frost, right? Your tomatoes got taken out by frost, your squash got taken out by frost, your potatoes got taken out by frost, peppers, eggplants, all those guys, cucumbers, should last till frost. And that's a test. Did they make it till frost, or did they get taken out by disease? So I like to suggest the end of September is a really good time to take a soil test. Like I say, the fall equinox, September 21st, take your soil test. And think about it, just like stick it in your head. Fall equinox, take a soil test. Send it in, takes a week to come back. October 1st, you get your soil test back, spend 2 weeks in the first half of October sourcing all the amendments you need, and then I just chuck them out there. Yeah, chuck them, whip them. I use a 5-gallon bucket method. It's very high tech. You stick the bucket under your arm. I guess I'm younger and more strong than some people here, but I take a 5-gallon bucket full of rock dust and I go like this, and I just, out she goes.
Do you mix it with anything, or you just mix them together?
Depending on what I'm using. If I'm using a straight rock dust, I don't need feeling to mix it with anything. As I said before, putting your minerals in the compost pile is the best way to do it. So it's now long before October or September, and you have the opportunity to take a soil test now, figure out what you need, put those minerals in your compost pile, let that compost, and then you can either spread that now in the fall, or you can spread it in the spring. But if I'm working with trace elements specifically, so I will say as a sort of a general point, I didn't grow up on an organic farm. My parents do run an organic farming organization, and so I experienced some familial pressure to remain within the rubric of organic, and have chosen to. Even though there are some things you can use which are not certified as organic, which are really good for the soil, I don't talk about them just because my parents would get too pissed off at me. So I only recommend things that are certified as organic. There are some things, like trace elements, You can buy copper sulfate or zinc sulfate or manganese sulfate or cobalt sulfate or sodium malodate. Various of these critical trace elements you can purchase, and you need 4 pounds of cobalt sulfate per acre. That is an unnatural material. Cobalt sulfate is a mined material which has been acidulated and concentrated, and it's allowed for organic use at restricted use, only when you've got a soil test showing deficiency. So organic understands you need these elements, and understands that if they're not there, you should bring them in, and they're hard to get, and so if you buy something that's processed, it's okay in this specific case. So if I'm using trace elements, I definitely mix them with something and don't put them down straight. You could either mix them with water and some molasses and spray them out with a backpack sprayer, or you could mix them with some compost, a wheelbarrow full of compost, take all your trace elements in the wheelbarrow full of compost, mix it up, and then spread that out. Ideally, you want to keep them from leaching. And as sulfates, they are technically salts, which means that when it rains, they will leach out. If you've got good organic matter in your soil, they'll probably get caught. But I like to say, add your trace elements with a carbon source. Other than that, I don't particularly. It's really rudimentary. Get them out there. Just get the minerals out of the land. And the sooner you do it, the sooner the process of revitalization will occur. So, yeah, okay. I'm just going to respect these questions here. It's only been an hour and 10 minutes. Okay, doing good. Potato beetles, powdery mildew, flea beetles. As far as insects and disease are concerned, I like to refer to insects and disease, bacterial or fungal, as nature's garbage crew. And if you are experiencing any of these pathogens in your crops, that is nature's report card for you. Things they call soil-borne pathogens, whether it's Phytophthora or Rhizoctonia or Pythium or Verticillium, I don't really care, honestly. I couldn't tell you which is Verticillium, which is Pythium. They're all soil-borne pathogens, and they're all symptoms of the plant which is unable to build carbohydrates from sugar. When a plant is building, like people know the taste of a peach off of a tree that's ripe, and know the taste of a peach from the grocery store. You can sort of hold those two thoughts. Or a tomato that's ripe, or anything, right? Or a carrot that has a carrot flavor versus an organic carrot from California from the grocery store, which tastes almost bitter or sometimes soapy, but generally repugnant. We have serious different experiences of flavor, and it can be the same variety, right? It can be bolero carrots, or whatever kind of peach you want to talk about. What causes that difference in flavor is different compounds, and people may have heard of carotenoids in carrots, or I think it's lycopene in tomatoes. We have brassicoses in the brassicas. We have there's terpenoids and alkaloids and phenolics and all these different compounds. These are compounds that we as animals experience as flavor and as aroma. So a tomato that has high levels of aroma and flavor has high levels of these what are called secondary metabolites. And to build those compounds, you need high levels of lipids in the plant. Those compounds are built out of fats and oils. That's just a biochemical fact. Fats and oils are built out of protein. Protein is built out of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are built out of sugar. So the plant starts with sugar, injects a bunch of it into the soil, takes up from the soil life some of these other elements, and uses them to build carbohydrates, and then to build protein, and then to build lipids, and then to build the secondary metabolites. And a plant which does not have the wherewithal to build carbohydrate is digestible to what we call soil-borne pathogens. Soil-borne pathogens can only eat simple sugars. They can't eat carbohydrates. So I like to use the example of a cow and a bale of hay. If I was to put a bale of hay here in the room, or Chris did, or there was a bale of hay here in the room, and a cow had walked in. The cow would see that bale of hay as food, when the rest of us here might have seen it as a seat. And the reason it's food for a cow and not food for us is because we can't digest cellulose. Right? Cellulose has no nutritional value for us. We can eat it, but we're going to die if we keep eating hay. The cow can live if it eats hay because it has 4 stomachs and it can break down cellulose. So we understand that concept. Understand that a Colorado potato beetle, as an example, larvae, doesn't have a liver. it can't digest protein. So if your plant is building protein on the way to building lipids, on the way to building secondary metabolites, it is physiologically indigestible to an insect, a larval form of an insect, any kind of larval form of an insect, a corn earworm, a tomato hornworm, any larval form of an insect. They don't have livers, they can't digest protein. It's real simple. So it goes up like that. So the soil-borne pathogens can't digest carbohydrates, the larval insects can't digest protein, the blights and mildews, the airborne fungal pathogens can't digest lipids, and the insects, beetles, the adult insects, can't digest secondary metabolites. So only when your crop tastes good and smells good is it indigestible to insects and diseases, and then only does it have the nutrition in it which makes it good for us. Amazingly, life figured this out and told us with our tongues what's good for us and what's not. So I like to say, I don't care if it's local, I don't care if it's organic, I don't care if it's woo-woo and foo-foo and everything else, permaculture, biodynamic, you name your ism. If it doesn't taste good, it's not good for you. Nothing revolutionary here. It's really so foundational and so rudimentary, actually, that sometimes it strikes people. So anyway, that's what I have to say about the thin beetles, powdery mildew, flea beetles, and any other insect or disease that you want to throw at me. I like to say, if you're growing healthy plants, you should expect your animal pest pressure to increase. Right? You should expect healthy plants to draw more rabbits, to draw more woodchucks, to draw more moles and voles, et cetera, et cetera. To which then you need to respond with cats and dogs, which is what humans have, started working with since we have agriculture. We have cats and dogs, and we don't feed them very much, and they take care of our predator population. At least that's what I do on my farm. You can do whatever you want to do, but I will tell you that you should expect pests in the form of insects and diseases to decrease as your plant health improves and your animal pest pressure to increase. Response time was your question. How long does this take? And you were asking about making foliar sprays as well. The systemic thing to do is to put into the soil what it needs to, be revitalized. But you can cheat, and you can, water things into the soil, or you can spray things on the plant leaf to give it what it needs right now. And we're not talking about soluble ions like NPK, right? We're not talking about NPK fertilizer. We're talking about, in many cases, copper or zinc or boron or cobalt or molybdenum or calcium. So what I use on my farm and I recommend to people is, there's a bunch of products out there that you can use in this kind of a short-term method, or you can make them yourself. Either way, but you can take your copper sulfate or your zinc sulfate or your sodium malodate or your rock phosphate, and you can solubilize it in water. And I always suggest mixing with a carbon source, like molasses is a great one. Humic acid or humates is another good one. Sugar will work. If you buffer those compounds with a carbon source, and you can spray it directly on the leaf surface, or you can water it into the soil.
500 to 1?
So once you've got a concentrate, I do a 2% concentration. So a quarter cup of whatever the mineral mix is to 1 gallon of water in a foliar spray. Yeah. So maybe, you can do a quart to an acre or half gallon to an acre of concentrate.
Rock dust as well?
Sure. You certainly could use rock dust. The question is, what does your plant need? And if you know the plant needs copper and zinc, and your rock dust does not have copper and zinc in it, well, putting rock dust on is not going to do any good. So people have, I think sometimes it's sort of a silver bullet mentality. I'll just use biochar. I'll just use compost tea. I'll just use rock dust. And only when you understand what the plant needs can you then intelligently give the plant what it needs. I do strongly suggest, and I haven't said this yet, so I'll say it right now, that people open themselves to their inklings that come to them. Have you heard of this thing called intuition? Some people experience it every now and then. I've been told that women have this a fourth brain. Men only have 3 brains, as science I understand. My wife talks about knowing when something's wrong with the kids. She feels it in her uterus. And I'm like, well, couldn't tell you about that, but I know what a gut feeling is. Right? We talk about gut feelings. We talk about knowing something's true in your heart. Anybody have this? Know something's true in your heart? Right? We know these things. We actually have antenna systems. They're called neurons. We have, all humans have 3 major organs that are full of neurons, which are shaped like antennae. I haven't talked much about antenna frequency yet, but I submit that nature operates through vibration to a large degree. Anybody ever look at the shape of a leaf? Just as a aside here, I'll call this an ash leaf, if I can do an ash leaf. Never looked at an ash leaf or any kind of leaf, really. It's greatly simplified. If you remove this outside of the leaf, and you just had, remember the olden days when we had these things on our roofs? Remember those? What are they called?
Antennas.
What do insects have on top of their heads? What are they called? Antenna. Yeah. Frequency for 1 second here. As I understand it, we're hardwired with antenna systems. And when we say in the vernacular, I knew it in my gut, I had a gut feeling, or I knew it in my heart. Women say, you know, my wife says, I don't know what, most women don't talk about it, but you know, I felt it in my uterus, I knew it in my uterus. These organs are full of these neurons which function as antenna systems. I'm not sure where the book is, but I've got a couple of good books on this topic. Like, here's the science. Deal with it if you want to, don't deal with it if you don't want to. When the anthropologists went down to the Amazon and talked to the indigenous people down there and said, you know, how could you possibly have figured out that this root and this leaf could be used for this ailment? Because, you know, we have to have a lot of dead people if you're going to experiment, right? Like, this is how we would do it. We're scientists. We're Westerners. We know better. We'd experiment. And they said, well, you know, the plants told us, duh. How else would you figure it out? Right? We pat them on the head, say silly, primitive, indigenous people. And then the anthropologists from Australia talking to the Aborigines, interestingly, get the same response to the same question. And the anthropologists in Central Africa talking to them side get the same answer to the same question. And the anthropologists all over the planet report that indigenous communities all say, well, the plants told us. And if you're a scientist, this is one of my little rants here, I apologize. If you're a scientist and you've got 15 data points, and 14 of your data points are on a line, and 1 data point's an outlier, anybody trained in science here? What do you do with the outlier? We'll talk about it? You chuck it. If our cultural construct is the only one that says that we can't talk to nature, we don't have the functional capacity, we're not hardwired to communicate with nature, and all the rest of these cultural, you know, traditions say we are, and the science also says, by the way, we have these antenna systems. Maybe we actually can. So what I really say is, if you're good, or we should all endeavor to get better at asking our plants what they need. And you know, there's always a couple people in the room, and some of them don't tell anybody who they are, who actually hear things, or see things, or shown things. Sometimes when I'm out in the garden, you know, whether I'm weeding, or whether I'm mulching, or tying, whatever I'm doing, I'll start like a little like a 5 or 6 word, you know, just sort of I don't know, lyric or something pops up in my head and just repeats itself over and over again. And if I can go on for 15 minutes, sort of, you know, with this beat in my head, this sort of lyric going over and over again, and not actually look at the lyric and, you know, what is it saying? But if I actually look at the lyric, like, so many times it has something to do with what they want. Like, you know, it'd be really helpful if you could just water us. You know, I'm not being tied up, but it's really dry down there. So I think a lot of us get these things, and you know, the process of gardening for many people is so meditative and so gratifying because they have these experiences and they don't know how to talk about it, or don't talk about it, or don't want to deal with it. I'm not quite sure what it is, but in my personal perspective is certainly the tools and the science and the you know, the lab reports and all that kind of stuff is really valuable. But there's also a major piece of the puzzle, which is the direct connection, communication, call it what you want to call it. So anyway, there's most of my rant on that topic. Insects, antenna. Anybody ever raised potatoes and had clouded potato beetles? Much I'm talking about potato beetles so much tonight. You've seen those little red guys with the black spots on their back, lines of black spots, right? When I grew up on the farm, we rotated our crops because that's what you do to prevent pest and disease pressure, is you rotate your crops. So we would have our potatoes way over here in that field one year, and then across the street, you know, other corner the next year, and those potato plants were up 2-3 inches, and there'd be, you know, a couple hundred potato beetles there. Like, but we haven't had any soil nitrogen over there for 3 years. Where did you guys all come from? Because they're all right there. They're not anywhere else. There was a guy named Phil Callahan, who's an entomologist, who's from the University of Florida. Phil Callahan, you can look him up. I've got a couple of his books here. His work is still classified by the U.S. military. So he's an entomologist. Entomologists study insects. The U.S. military has classified as his work. He died the last 5 years, but he was 90-something. He was doing his work in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Phil Callahan said that insects' antennae are actually functionally antennae. So let me just talk about this for a second here. Stepping back. Anybody heard of Alpha Centauri? Alpha Centauri. It's a star. My understanding is it's the closest star to us, which is not the sun. And it's about 9 light years away, which is basically pretty damn far, right? The Voyagers, which were sent off around when I was born almost 40 years ago, have just reached the edge of the solar system. Alpha Centauri is 9 light years away, and yet we think we know what Alpha Centauri is made out of. Right? We can ask anybody; they'll tell you Alpha Centauri is 51% hydrogen, 48% helium, and 1% other gases. They'll tell you that. So how do we know that? We know what Alpha Centauri is made up of because we read the frequency of the light. Because every element in chemistry is a vibration in physics. Hydrogen vibrates at 780 nanometers, and helium vibrates at 820 nanometers. There's a certain frequency of vibration, and when we look at the light, we can parse it apart. We can see 51% of the vibration coming from that star is hydrogen. Therefore, that star is hydrogen. We were reading the vibration. So we understand that we can, that things that matter has vibration. I like to talk about compounds. So people may have heard of these things called pheromones.
Yeah.
Female insect emits a pheromone. And a pheromone is basically a big compound. And if you understand that every element in that compound is vibrating, then you understand that that whole compound has a specific vibration, has a vibratory frequency. It's vibrating at this speed. And what Callahan figured out was that the male insect's antennae are tuned to the frequency of the vibration of the pheromone from the female insect. So I always wondered, like, how could it possibly be that a female insect emits a pheromone, she's flying in the night sky 5 miles away or 2 miles away, like how much does she have to emit for an insect with no nose to smell it 2 miles away at concentration levels that are higher over here than over here for him to find her? Have you ever thought about that one? Mm-hmm. Like, that seems really improbable. It doesn't make much sense. It makes much more sense to me that he's tuned to 88.5 and he's flying this way and it's going into static, and he turns around and he drives this way. Think about it for us, right? You drive out of the frequency range. It's like, this is the frequency range, you drive back into it and it gets strong, and over here it's strong. And functionally, this is what Phil Callahan said, is the antennae on insects are tuned to frequencies. And if you understand that concept, then it shouldn't be much of a jump to understand that a leaf that's full of nitrate, a potato leaf full of nitrate, has a vibration that a potato leaf full of protein does not. And the adult Colorado potato beetles and antennae are tuned to the frequency of a potato leaf full of nitrate, because that's what their babies can eat. Their babies can't eat protein, and so they're not tuned to that frequency. They're tuned to 88.5. 89.7 can be really, really strong, and they don't hear. That's how they see. They don't see with their noses, they don't see with their eyes, they see with these things on their bodies which are most developed. That's their primary mode of perception. So anyway, I really got off on a bit of a tangent there, but I think it's exciting and interesting. I still have time, so I'm going to keep going. Response time can be fast, can be slow, depends entirely on what you're doing and what you're working with. Weathered soils and mineralization, I think I touched on that topic. Weathered soils, mineralization, never asked, I can't remember. Do you feel like you got your news there?
Did you say earlier that soils can be rebuilt strictly with rock dusts and seawater, and that's
I did.
really all you need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. From off-site.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want to be working, with cover crops and polycultures and all that kind of stuff when it's possible. But as far as, permaculturalists oftentimes, have this, not oftentimes, some permaculturalists have this, like, I'm not bringing anything in, or by the net people too, like, I'm not bringing anything in from off-site. My land is an organism, and, for some reason, this line, which is a theoretical line in the book somewhere, is a real line, and I'm not going to cross that line to rebuild my land. That seems to me a bit much, but I do support not, buying chemicals from companies and all that kind of stuff. I do support the local natural ethos, and so I would suggest. What I'd like to say is anywhere where you've got pavement, blacktop, right? If you've got blacktop is made out of crushed rock and tar. When the tar comes from the tar sands or wherever, the local, those gasoline plants, or they make gasoline refinery. One of the byproducts of a refinery is tar, and they take that tar from far away and mix it with crushed rock. The vast majority of your road is crushed rock, and that crushed rock comes from a quarry. And the quarries are, local, because it doesn't make sense economically to drive rock 500 miles when you got it everywhere. So what they do is they drill a hole, put the explosives in, blow up the rock, take the digger, whatever kind of digger it is, put it in the truck, dump the rock into a crusher. This happens everywhere, all over the place. It's called the aggregate industry. Tilcon, there's a big Tilcon plant going down 84, right? Did I bang it right? There's that massive Tilcon plant there. That is going on everywhere. You don't see it everywhere, but it is everywhere. And a byproduct of that crushing process is powder. So we're talking about surface area. The finely crushed rock dust is basically there's so much extra. The process of building roads and things like that produces so much extra rock dust that it is dumped back into the hole. And we've got hundreds of millions of tons of rock dust laying around in these holes, available at $2 a ton, or maybe $5 a ton, or $10 a ton, depending on how friendly that guy's feeling today, and how much they want to deal with some gardener hassling them. Just go fill up your pickup truck, don't bother me, right? It's like we've only got 500 million tons of it laying over there. We don't have anything to do with it besides pile it up. So, yeah, I would say between rock dust and seawater, ideally you understand what your soil needs and what's in this rock dust and that rock dust. Different deposits, different quarries have different minerals in them. Some are granitic, some are basaltic, some are sedimentary, right? We know about different types of rocks, and there's all these subdivisions inside of that. So if you can overlay what your soil needs with the right rock dust, you can extraordinarily inexpensively remineralize vast acreage, which is what I was talking about with South Asia and things like that. Right. That was a long answer to a simple question. Yes?
You talk about seawater.
Yeah.
How do you actually apply this to your
Seawater.
land? Yeah.
Okay.
You go down and get filling jugs of seawater and
I've
dump it on your
got
soil?
3.5, 55-gallon drums of seawater, stockpiled in various corners of my farm. That we applied, 15 gallons of seawater yesterday through the drip tape. It's been raining like crazy. I'm not sure anybody noticed. We had drought, maybe not down here.
Yeah, we did.
60 miles north of here, we've had 10 inches of rain in the last 3 weeks. If you were a human, say, theoretically, and you had a lot of fluid passing through your body, perhaps more rapidly than it should, that might be called diarrhea. Anybody heard of that? Diarrhea. There's giardia. It kills, a few hundred million people a year. Giardia, diarrhea, is basically too much fluid passing through your body and all of your nutrients being passed out through that diarrhea. There's somebody won a Nobel Peace Prize, I think, for putting together a little 10-cent electrolyte pack, which saves, 300,000 people a year from dying. And all it is a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, electrolyte pack. And so a little bit of molasses and a little bit of seawater is a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt that you can add to your soil right now when things are getting leached out. I like to say that people's tomato plants are probably setting fruit now, and maybe even the fruit starting to fill. I'm not sure if it's ripening yet, but if you were a human, say, and you had just set fruit, and it was beginning to ripen, that would be called being pregnant. I'm guessing a few people here have been pregnant, and probably most of us have been in relationships with people who've been pregnant. And you may know that when people are pregnant, they need to eat, right? They need what they need. As I understand it, when a woman is pregnant and she's not getting the calcium she needs, she'll just suck it out of her bones to build her baby, right? Teeth fall out, all kinds of stuff. You know, when you're not getting the calcium you need, you suck it out of your bones to give to your baby. That's what late blight is. That's what early blight is. A lot of these things, you know, when the plant is pregnant, she's really hungry, and if she's got a bad case of diarrhea, she's got you know a caloric intake per day of 400. But be pregnant with octuplets. Your tomato plant, right? Nice tomato plant with lots of fruit filling. You're pregnant with octuplets. You're only 3.5 feet tall, so you're not like a 25-year-old woman who's, you know, got her body. You're 15. You're just post-pubescent. You just hit puberty. You're just able to have babies. You're already fully loaded, and you're starving to death. Right? That's what causes disease. It's nothing radical or revolutionary. If we understood life, which is very intuitive because we experience it, we've lived life. If you understand life, think about your plants as though they were alive and where they would be. When your plant is germinating, it's being born. It needs its colostrum. It needs to be warm. It needs to be told it's loved. And, you know, when you're transplanting your baby, you're putting it out into kindergarten. Right? Are you going to support it? Are you going to put it out in the cold with no blanket? Or are you going to put it out in the warm with lots of food? Right? I mean, if you think about this, if you think about life cycles, it's really quite easy. And this is really what guides the process of, you know, supplementing your crops. Yes?
Actually, I don't remember.
I don't know. No.
So, in terms of adding seawater,
Yes.
what about diluted sea salt?
Sea
Would
salt
that do
plus
it?
water equals seawater.
And it's not toxic.
As far as I'm
You
concerned.
put these on plants that are roots.
I put down,
Diluted.
I would say, as a systemic practice, I do 75 pounds of sea salt per acre per year. In the fall, when I'm remineralizing my land, I put down 75 pounds of sea salt just because. It's going to rain and a lot of that's going to get leached out, but seawater has 92 different elements in it. Seawater is a naturally occurring material with the broadest spectrum of elements. Seawater has the levels and ratios of elements, which is almost exactly the same as amniotic fluid.
You can't grow anything around the water, around the beach, because it's the salt.
Balance.
Balance, that's it.
75 pounds of sea salt per acre is not that much.
And you're pumping it through a drip.
In my case, I put down, you know, 300 gallons of water and 5 gallons of seawater. And then we just got 2 inches of rain.
Okay, so you put 5 gallons of seawater into 300 gallons of
In a
pure water.
300-gallon tank,
Okay, so
and
you
open the
dilute it,
spigot.
you dilute it down, because you can tell you're dry.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. So this is where the nuances come in. I'm basically, you know, rapidly skating the surface of concepts here tonight. I only have 2 hours to cover a hell of a lot. And I didn't say this, you didn't say this, but we do have a 2-day course scheduled around here at Chris's house.
We do.
I think
In
this fall.
Simsbury, November
for
and
those who are
January,
interested.
2 days.
And going into the nuances and details of this. This is actually a covert sales pitch. I'm not sure you got that. This is no, we're selling a workshop, selling a course in how to do this. And if this all makes sense, there's no better way to, you know, take action than to act. If this may be true, if this sounds like it, you know, kind of makes sense, what the hell, I'll try it out. If you want to give it a fair shot, you know, actually take a couple days, you know, take a few notes. This is some basic practices. In October do this, in November do this, in January do that.
Do you plant seedlings on your farm, or do you do everything from seed?
Both.
You do seedlings.
Both seedlings and seed. Yeah. I have been on my property, we have been on our property for 6.5 years. We bought a house and barn and 15 acres for $115,000. And that was only because the house was a tear down, the barn was condemned. And it was the value of the land minus the disposal cost of the buildings. And that was 6 years ago. So first thing we did was salvage the house. Second thing we did was salvage the barn. Third thing we did was clear back the brush. And then we started, you know, working with the land. So I am nowhere near operating where I'd like to right now. I'm still fairly young. I'm not sure if anybody knows that. Still at the end of years. Give me another 5 years, and I'll tell you what I do.
But it's,
and I'm more confident
not
about
to
it.
jump topics here, but the weed seed, you said it's healthy, okay to have weed seed all over your property.
jumping topics for sure.
But
Yes.
you know, I at a conference in Rhode Island, I'm sorry, I'm not on the phone. But, well, the Mennonite people in Pennsylvania are raising vetch in winter rye.
Yeah.
When they do 2 crops over the summer.
Yeah.
And they get rid of all the weed seed, that way they choke
Yeah.
out all the weed seed. Then the next season, they wouldn't have to deal with any weeds. And all the nutrient value in the soil would go into the plant.
Those seeds are good for a few hundred years, so you're
Yeah.
not going to take them out.
Well, they showed us film of it, nothing.
Well, just because they didn't germinate doesn't mean they're not there. It means that the environment is not appropriate for them. So my understanding is that if you take, you know, I'll just use an example of volcanic action. So I think it was last summer, there was a volcano in Hawaii. I remember, like, I go on Google News, check the news and see what's going on, and like every day for weeks, there would be like the breathless report on the lava flow is crossing the road, the lava flow is going into the cemetery, the lava flow, like, it was just ridiculous, right? Because it was like, we can't talk about real things. So if you take that new rock and you do a microbiological assay, who's living on the surface of that rock? It'll be almost entirely bacteria. Like 1,000,000 to 1 bacteria to fungi. If you come back 500 years later and do a microbiological assay at that point, it'll be 1,000,000 to 1 in the other direction. 1,000,000 to 1 fungi to bacteria. And what I like to say is those bacteria and fungi are the gut flora of the plant. And different plants have different gut flora. Right? A cow has different gut flora than a rabbit, has different gut flora than a chicken. And so, depending on who's living in the soil, some crops will flourish and other crops won't. And so weeds, what we call weeds, have a certain gut flora, which is highly bacterial. When you till the soil and you cause genocide, the first people that reestablish are the bacteria. And the first plants, whose job it is to cover that bare soil, because nature is modest, she likes to keep herself covered. She will cover herself as soon as she can. The people who eat the byproducts of bacterial digestion are what we call weeds. So the less you disturb the soil, and so naturally soil will evolve from bacterial dominance to fungal dominance. It naturally evolves. That's just how it works. And so when you've got a fungally dominant soil because you haven't disturbed the land deeply for a couple of years or a year, what you're going to have is an environment where the people who eat bacterial byproducts are going to starve to death. And they're not even going to germinate because they know better. So it's not that the weed seeds are gone, it's that the environment has been shifted, which is why I like to minimize tillage. It's a really good way to minimize weed pressure. The more you till, the more weeds you're going to get. The more you disturb the land, the more life you kill, the more you're going to have a bacterial dominance reestablishing, and then you're going to have the plants which grow in that environment. Friends, it's probably a really, really, really good thing. They're full of nice growth hormones, it's got all the trace elements, it's good stuff. Yeah, I love season.
And add it to your compost pile.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yes?
What is plant doo-doo?
Plant doo-doo.
Poop.
Plant poop. How do plants poop, or what are you saying exactly?
Like how, what is it? Do they
I'm not sure, I don't think I ever contemplated that one. I don't know what plant poop would be.
Compost.
Sugar. Sugar, but it's not a, I mean, it's
not a waste.
It says,
What
yeah.
would be the waste product?
I don't know. Oxygen? Oxygen, I think. But that's more like us breathing out air. I don't know about that. It's a good question. I don't know. Moving along here on the list, we have technically 20 minutes left until 8:30. But so green sand, I touched on green sand as one piece of the puzzle. Green sand is a basalt rock. It's high levels of potassium, high levels of manganese, 2% manganese, I think, 7 to 9% potassium. So it's a wonderful. It's got 26 different elements in it. It's a wonderful material, but it depends on what you need in your soil, whether or not you should be applying it.
Where do you get it?
Well, it's dug up out of the ground in New Jersey, and it costs about $50 a ton there. If you were to buy it, from a farm supply store, you'd be lucky to get it for $20 a bag, which is $800 a ton. Anybody do the math on that one? What's your markup on rock? It's pretty
So
good.
if you're working in perennials and
Yeah.
such, that's a needed.
I think taking a soil test is a really good idea.
Yeah.
I think taking a soil test is a really, really good idea. If you go on our website, bionutrient.org, we've got a form on there which you can download and print out, and it'll give you 17 different elements for $30. And there's books, this one over here, the Intelligent Garden, tells you how to read that soil test. I teach you how to read the soil test in the workshop. The idea is, if you can actually engage empirically with, the land, it's just, we're talking ballparks here, we're not talking nuanced perfection, but just sort of, holy crap, I got no boron and the calcium level is like embarrassing. Okay, add some boron, add some calcium. I got tons of potassium, don't need green sand here. Once you can learn these basic things, and it's not that complicated really, if you put your mind to it. You can, there's books, I've got a couple books up here on how to read soil tests, that one's a good one. There's, or you can, pay somebody $10 and they'll give you the answers. But yeah.
I have a small garden, and I put rocks near some of my vegetables and certainly
Yes.
near my flowers. Doesn't some of that rock dust go into the plants?
Certainly somewhat, but again, like I said before, the surface area on a 1 pound rock is nominal in relation to the surface area of 1 pound of rock dust. I think the rocks have other effects that are positive. There's a diamagnetic and a paramagnetic. If you look at the Japanese, gardens, the way, there's a whole subtle aspect to it, which is really don't have time for here. I don't really understand, but rocks, yeah, they're cool. And they got lots of. That's a whole other topic. Foundationally, air, water, minerals, biology, carbon. If we take care of the basic stuff, then we can get fancy. But in many cases, people aren't taking care of the basics, and their gardens aren't doing anywhere near as well as they could. All right, I'm almost done with this list here, so I'm going to proceed through on the list. Trace elements. I think I talked about trace elements to some extent, perhaps sufficiently. Foliar sprays, how to make them. Yes, talked about that sufficiently. Not really, but enough. Soil types. We talked about that, I believe. Depending on where you are in the geology, you're going to have different underlying minerals and historical environmental conditions. Soil types, balance between elements. I refer to that, sort of obliquely, but there's pretty good science out here. I generally, when I teach the course, refer to a guy named Dr. William Albrecht, who was the head of the soil department at the University of Missouri for 20 years, and did a lot of the foundational work on what are the levels and ratios of elements that correlate with healthy plant growth, and healthy animal growth that consumes those plants. Really exciting, hundreds of published papers, 1930s and 40s, right? Not new information, it's old information. And companion planting, I think I referred to that. So, with about 15 minutes left, I am happy to go off the deep end or take some more questions.
When you till, you say you only till 2 inches down. How do you plant your seed? You put it by hand or with a blade?
I do almost nothing with machines.
Okay. So you put a trowel, you dig a hole in it? Or
Just by hand.
But, okay, it's loose enough to do that?
Can't believe it. Won't believe it.
Okay.
Refuse to believe it.
Well, okay, you're making.
Have you ever left a pile of leaves on a garden bed over the winter and come back in the spring and pull the leaves off and just dug up a handful of soil?
I guess, you don't drive tractors over your soil.
Minimally, and only if anyone wants to be barked at. I wouldn't have a bark since I've had children. Right? If you want to be barked at on my farm, just step on that bed. Get off my beds.
When you make the bed with a bed paper,
yeah,
you're only tilling 2 inches down, and you're able to make a bed, and it raises up. I'm just curious about that. I usually till down 8 inches just to do anything.
As far as I'm concerned, if you feel like tillage is necessary or appropriate, don't let me tell you not to.
Okay.
Understand the negative implications of it. Try to minimize it. I say once you've got your beds established, and if you manage that soil well, you shouldn't need to till. If your soil's tight and hard and compact and you need to loosen it, open it up because of something you did or whatever happened, fine, no problem. But the less you do till, as a shallower you till, generally the better for the overall ecosystem.
After it rains, you get that crust on top. Farmers always traditionally.
It's got a crust if the soil's bare.
What's that?
There's only a crust if the soil is bare. If the soil is covered, you'll never see a crust. If you were to walk around my potato patch right now, or my eggplants, or peppers, melons, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, you will not see soil or anything resembling it. You'll see like a good heavy level of mulch everywhere on my farm. Where I'm picking salad greens, it's a,
What is the mulch?
hay.
Hay.
Mulch hay. They get old ground bales, 25 bucks. Rotten ground bales. And lay them right down.
Well, what I was gonna say, traditionally farmers break the earth to let the oxygen into the root, and the plants seem to grow quicker.
Well, and it's really important to have oxygen, and if you've got a crust, you should. But if you've got earthworms going up and down, and you don't have a crust, there's no need to. Air is really, really important. There's no question, air is really, really important. And a lot of people who are, high on no tillage have soils that are rock hard, and their crops look like crap. And that's because they don't have any air. And farmers know this. People who farmed long enough know if your soil's tight, you better do something.
If you want to receive our emails, I can give you information about events and other chapter meetings like this. Dan is going to come down and do a farm tour for us, a guided farm field walk at Eddy Farm in Newington on August 3rd. That might be something you'd want to come check out. Eddy Farm has been mineralizing for, I think, this is their 5th year. So you'll hear a little bit about where they started and where they've come to now and where they're going moving forward. And then, as Dan mentioned, we have a 2-day workshop that he's coming down to teach for us at my house in Simsbury. Sign-ups for that will be through the parent organization, but information about the workshop, the dates, and content you can get either on our Facebook page, on our chapter website, or through our emails. So the sign-up sheet's on the table if you want to continue getting more information, and hopefully you'll want to get involved with the organization.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.